At 6:47 in the morning, my debit card was rejected trying to pay for a prescription, $3.89. A bottle of blood pressure medication I had taken every single day for the past 6 years. The pharmacist, a kind young woman named Brianna who always remembered my name, looked at me with that specific, uncomfortable pity that only comes from watching an older person get embarrassed in public. She tried the card twice. Same result both times. I stepped to the side, pulled out my phone, and called my daughter Carol. She answered on the first ring, not the second. The first, like she had been waiting. "We took care of that account, Dad," she said. Her voice was smooth, practiced, the way a person sounds when they rehearsed a conversation in the mirror the night before. "Raymond and I decided it wasn't safe for you to have unrestricted access anymore. We set you up on an allowance, $50 a week for incidentals. If you need something beyond that, you call us first." Raymond was her husband, a man who had never worked a full calendar year in his life without borrowing money from someone. I did not respond. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice in that pharmacy. I said 2 words, "I see." Then I ended the call, put my phone back in my shirt pocket, and asked Brianna if she could hold my prescription for 48 hours. She said, "Of course." I thanked her and walked out to my truck. I drove directly to the main branch of my credit union and sat down with the branch manager. 90 minutes later, my phone started ringing. I let it ring. By the time I got home, I had 43 missed calls from Carol's number and 11 from Raymond's. I made myself a pot of coffee, sat down at my kitchen table, and did not call either of them back. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. And if you believe that a person's age is not the same thing as their incompetence, hit subscribe. My name is Gerald. I am 64 years old. And what I am about to tell you is the story of how my only daughter and her husband made the single most expensive mistake of their lives, trying to convince the world that I was helpless. I spent 31 years working as a licensed electrician in Columbus, Ohio. Not a foreman, not a contractor. An electrician who showed up every morning before the sun came up and did not leave a job site until every connection was correct, every panel was safe, and every inspection passed. I built a reputation in that city block by block. By the time I was 52, I owned a small electrical contracting company with 8 employees, nothing flashy. A rented office, 2 vans with the company name on the side, and a steady stream of commercial clients who trusted my work because I had never once cut a corner. When my wife Donna was diagnosed with ovarian cancer 11 years ago, I spent 3 years watching the strongest person I had ever known fight the hardest battle I had ever witnessed. She fought with a grace that still makes my chest ache when I think about it. When she passed, I was 54 years old, sitting in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and fresh flowers, holding her hand and telling her it was okay to let go. Carol was 26 then. She cried at the funeral in a way that made the neighbors whisper about how devoted she was to her mother. Within 8 months, she had moved Raymond into my house without asking. Within 18 months, they had moved out together into an apartment across town that I later discovered I was quietly helping to finance through a series of small loans that were never repaid and never discussed. I never said a word. She was my daughter. She was grieving. I told myself that providing for her was the same as honoring Donna. That was my first mistake. The second mistake was letting Carol sit beside me when I met with my accountant 3 years ago. I had just agreed to sell my contracting company to a regional electrical group that had been pursuing me for the better part of 2 years. The deal was good. Better than good. I walked away with a sum of money that a man who started his career pulling wire through conduit in February cold had no business expecting to see in a single check. Carol was in the room. She heard the number. I watched her face in my peripheral vision when the accountant said it out loud. Something shifted behind her eyes. Something I told myself later I had imagined. I had not imagined it. In the months that followed the sale, Carol's behavior changed in ways so gradual I nearly missed them entirely. She started calling more often, which I appreciated. She started asking detailed questions about my finances, which I explained away as concern. She and Raymond began stopping by the house unannounced on Sunday mornings, which I told myself was family closeness. What they were actually doing was cataloging. They were walking through my home like people assessing an estate sale, noting the square footage, the condition of the roof, the age of the appliances. I only understood that later. The morning Carol told me she had canceled my bank accounts, I had already been watching the warning signs for 6 weeks without naming them. Raymond had started signing for packages at my front door when he happened to be there. Carol had started finishing my sentences in front of other people with a particular kind of patient tolerance, the tone a person uses with someone who is slightly slow. She had mentioned twice, very gently, that she was worried about me living alone, that the house was a lot to manage, that a man my age shouldn't have to deal with all of this stress. I was 64 years old. I ran a company for 12 years. I managed payroll, insurance, municipal contracts, and OSHA compliance. But according to my daughter, the stress of paying for my own blood pressure medication at a pharmacy was apparently more than I could reasonably handle. The morning she froze my accounts, I drove to my credit union and sat across from the branch manager, a methodical and deeply professional man named Arthur, who had managed my accounts for 9 years. When I walked into his office and told him what had happened, he opened my file and went pale. "Gerald," he said quietly, sliding a document across his desk toward me. "Your daughter came in 4 days ago. She had power of attorney documentation granting her full financial authority over your accounts. She presented a physician's signed statement indicating that you were experiencing moderate cognitive decline and were at risk of financial self-harm. We were obligated to act on it." I looked at the paperwork. The physician's name on the document was a doctor, Philip Armin, a name I had never heard in my life because I had never been a patient of his. I had never set foot inside his office. The cognitive assessment he claimed to have conducted, the one that described me as confused, easily manipulated, and unable to manage day-to-day financial decisions, had been conducted without me in the room. My signature on the accompanying consent form was a forgery. A decent one, but a forgery. Arthur was already reaching for his desk phone. "Gerald, this is a crime. I need to call the fraud division right now." I put my hand on his desk. "Not yet," I said. "Give me 24 hours. Flag every account for suspicious activity. Freeze any outgoing transfers above $50. But leave the power of attorney active in your system. Don't alert her that anything has changed." He stared at me. "I need you to understand that what she did carries federal criminal penalties." "I understand perfectly," I told him. "That is exactly why I need her to believe it worked." I drove home. I poured that pot of coffee, and then I called the one person I should have called the moment I watched Carol's expression change in my accountant's office 3 years ago. Her name was Patricia Holt. She was a 61-year-old attorney who specialized in elder law and asset protection, and she had been a friend of Donna's long before she was ever a professional contact of mine. She was sharp, relentless, and she had seen this particular crime committed against older parents more times than she could count. When I explained what had happened, there was a silence on her line that lasted about 4 seconds. Then she said, in a voice completely devoid of any surprise whatsoever, "Gerald, I need you to get into your car and drive to my office right now." I was there within the hour. Patricia's investigator, a former insurance fraud specialist named Marcus, spent the next 17 hours pulling Carol and Raymond's financial records apart with the precision of a man dismantling a complicated machine. What he found was not a daughter trying to protect a vulnerable father. What he found was a family that had been financially drowning for the better part of 3 years and had decided that the water they were going drowning in was going to be mine. Raymond's landscaping business, the one he had launched with $40,000 I had loaned him 4 years prior and never been repaid, had never generated a profit in any single quarter of its existence. He currently owed $96,000 across 3 business lines of credit and had been defaulting on the minimum payments for 5 months. Carol carried $62,000 in personal credit card debt. Their mortgage was 4 months delinquent. They had received a preliminary notice of foreclosure that they were apparently keeping in a drawer somewhere and pretending did not exist. They were not trying to protect me. They were trying to liquidate me before their own lives collapsed entirely around them. Patricia looked at me across her conference table when Marcus finished his report. She did not offer false comfort or careful softening of what she was about to say. She said, "Gerald, the physician who signed that cognitive assessment, this Dr. Armand, his license was suspended in the state of Indiana 2 years ago for issuing fraudulent medical evaluations in a similar case. He relocated here. He is currently operating out of a small office in an industrial park on the east side of the city. We have reason to believe Raymond contacted him approximately 6 weeks ago." She slid a photograph across the table. It was a grainy image pulled from a parking lot camera, time-stamped 5 weeks earlier. Raymond's truck parked outside a nondescript single-story office building at 9:15 on a Tuesday morning. The man had been planning this since before I watched Carol's face change in my accountant's office. He had been planning this for longer than I had allowed myself to believe. I asked Patricia what she needed from me. She looked at me with the calm, direct gaze of a woman who had built her entire career on protecting people who had been underestimated. She said, "I need you to go home, act completely normal, and let them believe their plan worked. Can you do that?" I told her I had spent 31 years showing up in ice storms and construction sites where everything was trying to kill you. I thought I could manage dinner with my daughter. She almost smiled. Then she picked up her phone and started making calls. Carol texted me that same evening. Her message was warm and careful in the way that people are warm and careful when they are lying to you and they know it. She said she and Raymond wanted to have dinner on Saturday, that they missed me and wanted to talk about some exciting plans they had been thinking about for my future. She used a heart emoji. I responded that Saturday sounded wonderful and that I would bring dessert. I went to that dinner. Their apartment was clean and aggressively decorated with the kind of furniture. Raymond opened a bottle of wine I was fairly certain had been charged to a credit card that was over its limit. Carol served a roast that she presented with the careful pride of someone who had been rehearsing hospitality as a performance. We talked about a neighbor's dog and a television program they were watching, and the weather in October. I ate slowly. I let my fork clink against my plate a little more than necessary. I repeated one sentence twice. I stared at the window for a few seconds longer than normal when Raymond was speaking. They ate every bit of it. By the time the dinner plates were cleared, the atmosphere had changed the way air pressure changes before a storm. Raymond straightened in his chair. Carol folded her hands on the table. They had clearly discussed who would speak first. Raymond spoke first. He called me Gerald instead of Dad, which he had been doing for about 2 years and which I had never corrected. He talked about responsibility and careful planning and making sure that the people we love are truly taken care of. He talked about these things for approximately 4 minutes without saying a single concrete word. Then Carol picked up a folder from the counter behind her, the kind of folder that has been sitting there the whole evening, waiting to be produced at exactly this moment, and set it on the table in front of my plate. It was a quitclaim deed. My home. The house where I raised Carol. The house where Donna spent her last months in her own bed, surrounded by her own things. The house I had paid off 17 years ago and had never once considered selling was to be transferred entirely and unconditionally into Carol's name. The accompanying document was a management agreement explaining that Carol and Raymond would handle the sale of the property on my behalf and use the proceeds to secure my placement in what they described as a premier memory care facility, with beautiful grounds and attentive staff. There was a pen on top of the folder. Carol pushed it slightly toward me with one finger. She told me it was the best thing for everyone. I picked up the pen. I held it in my hand. I looked at Carol the way I had looked at her when she was small and had told me a lie she thought I believed. She held my gaze steadily. She had convinced herself I was fading. She had told herself this story so many times that she had started to believe it. I set the pen down. Then I reached for my water glass. I knocked it directly onto the folder. A full glass, straight into the papers. The quitclaim deed soaked through in about 4 seconds, the ink bleeding into soft purple streaks until the signature line was entirely illegible. Carol sucked in a sharp breath. Raymond's face went a particular color that I associated with a man whose plan is slipping through his hands faster than he can close his fist. I dabbed at the table with my napkin and looked up at both of them with the mildly distressed expression of a person who has just had a small accident. "Oh," I said quietly, "I am sorry about that." Raymond stood up so quickly, his chair caught on the rug and nearly tipped. He looked at the ruined papers and then looked at me. And in that moment, the careful, patient mask he had been wearing all evening cracked completely down the middle. He leaned across the table. His voice dropped to something low and mean that I suspected was the voice he used when no one else was listening. He told me that a spilled glass of water was not going to change a single thing, that the power of attorney was already filed, that Dr. Armin had already signed a formal assessment, that if I refused to cooperate voluntarily, they would simply proceed with having me placed under a medical guardianship order, at which point I would have no legal standing to contest anything, that the house would be sold either way, that I could make this easy or I could make it hard, but the outcome was going to be identical. Carol stood beside him. She crossed her arms. The heart emoji felt like a long time ago. She said, "Daddy, we are doing this because we love you. If you fight us on this, we will have no choice but to request an emergency commitment evaluation. The judge will take one look at Dr. Armin's assessment and sign the order the same afternoon. You will be transported to a facility by the end of the week. Is that really what you want? I looked at my daughter. I looked at the man she had married. I looked at the folder of ruined papers sitting in a puddle of water on their dinner table. I stood up. I did not hunch. I did not shuffle. I stood up the way I had stood up at every job site, every inspection, every negotiation for 31 years. Straight and still, and taking up exactly the space I was entitled to take up. I looked at Raymond and I said, very quietly, 4 months behind on the mortgage is a hard way to live. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had heard since the hospital room where Donna died. Raymond's mouth opened. No sound came out. Carol turned to look at her husband with an expression I recognized as the beginning of a very serious conversation they were going to have the moment I left. I picked up my jacket from the back of my chair, thanked them for the roast, and walked out the front door. Patricia called me before I made it to the highway. She said, "Marcus just sent me the audio from the Armand office. We have everything we need." Gerald Raymond visited that clinic 4 days ago. He paid Dr. Armand $6,000 in cash to prepare a second evaluation, a more severe one, timed to support an emergency guardianship petition they are planning to file Monday morning. If that petition is filed and a judge signs it before we can respond, things become significantly more complicated. "How long do we have?" I asked. She said, 3 days. I asked her what she needed me to do. She said, "Go home, unlock the back door, and trust me." I went home. I made coffee. And then I started working through the list of things I had been quietly doing for the past 17 hours since I sat down in Patricia's conference room and understood the true shape of what was happening. The house was the centerpiece of their plan. Without the house, they had no major liquid asset to convert. What they did not know, because I had never told anyone after Donna passed, was that the house had not been legally mine in the simple sense they imagined for the past 7 years. After Donna died, Patricia had helped me place it inside a revocable living trust. My name as trustee, a charitable foundation as the secondary beneficiary, and a series of conditions governing any potential sale that could not be waived by a power of attorney, forged or otherwise. The quitclaim deed Carol had slid across her dinner table was a document that had no legal mechanism to accomplish what they intended. It was a piece of paper attached to an asset they had never actually been able to touch. The money from the company's sale was further removed still. It sat inside a brokerage account that had never appeared on any document Carol had access to, managed by a financial advisor in a city 200 miles away, and structured with a transfer on death designation pointing to 3 medical research organizations Donna had cared about. Not to Carol, not to Raymond, not to any member of my family. I had not planned this as a trap. I had planned it as grief. After Donna died, giving that money to the causes she believed in felt like the only thing that made sense. But the night I sat in Patricia's office and understood what my daughter had decided to do, I was deeply grateful for every single quiet decision I had made in the years since. On Sunday evening, I was sitting on my front porch with a cup of coffee when a dark blue sedan I did not recognize pulled slowly past my house twice. Marcus called me 40 minutes later. He said Raymond had retained a private process server to deliver the guardianship petition to my home first thing Monday morning, hoping to catch me before Patricia could file any countermotion. Raymond had also made a call Sunday afternoon to a medical transport company, the kind that handles non-emergency psychiatric transfers, and had scheduled a vehicle to be available Tuesday morning, pending the judge's expected order. They had a timeline, they had professionals hired, they had a forged document from a suspended physician, and a plan to have me loaded into a transport van and delivered to a facility before I could make a single phone call. I called Patricia. She said, "I already know. We are filing at 7 a.m. when the courthouse opens. We will have a judge on the phone before Raymond's process server finishes his coffee. And Gerald, the county sheriff's office has been briefed. There will be 2 deputies at your home at 6:30 tomorrow morning." I said, "Tell them to park around the corner until I give the word." She paused. "Gerald," I said, "I want him to walk up to my front door believing he has won. Let him knock. Let him come inside if he wants to. I want to be sitting in my living room when he realizes that everything he built this plan on does not exist." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The coffee better be good." It was. Raymond arrived at 8:14 Monday morning. He was alone, which surprised me. Carol had apparently decided that a certain careful distance between herself and the mechanics of what was happening was strategically useful. She would later claim she had known nothing about the transport van or the timeline or the process server. The deputies parked around the corner would eventually form a different view of that claim. Raymond knocked. I told him the door was open. He walked into my living room and stopped when he saw me. I was sitting in my armchair in a clean flannel shirt with a cup of coffee on the side table and the television off. I was not shuffling. I was not staring at the wall. I looked exactly like what I was, which was a 64-year-old man who had slept 8 hours and was waiting for something he already knew was coming. He had a folder under his arm. He laid it on my coffee table without being invited to sit down. He told me the papers inside constituted a formal petition for emergency guardianship, signed and submitted to the court, along with a supporting medical evaluation from a licensed physician. He told me that I had a legal right to contest it, but that the evaluation was comprehensive and the judge was expected to sign the order within hours. He told me that the most dignified thing I could do for myself and for Carol was to cooperate voluntarily rather than make this public and unpleasant. He said the word dignified. I want you to hold on to that. I picked up my phone from the side table and pressed 2 buttons. Patricia answered on speaker. She was already at the courthouse. She said, "Raymond, the petition you filed this morning has been flagged by the court as a contested matter. A responding motion has already been submitted, challenging the validity of the supporting medical evaluation on the grounds that the physician who signed it, Dr. Philip Armand, does not hold a current valid medical license in this state. The court has placed an automatic hold on any guardianship order, pending a hearing scheduled for this Thursday. Additionally, a county sheriff's deputy is currently executing a warrant for Dr. Armand's business records related to the fraudulent evaluation." The folder Raymond had placed on my coffee table had not moved. He was staring at the phone. Patricia continued, "Raymond, a separate motion has also been filed, requesting the immediate revocation of the power of attorney submitted to Gerald's credit union on the grounds that the signature on the supporting documents is a forgery. A handwriting analysis has been submitted as supporting evidence. This is now a criminal matter being reviewed by the county prosecutor's office. I would strongly suggest that you contact your own attorney in the next 30 minutes. I picked up my coffee cup. I took a slow sip. Raymond looked at me, not with rage, the way I had expected. He looked at me with the specific, hollow expression of a man who has just stepped onto a floor that was never as solid as he believed. He said, "Gerald." His voice was unsteady. He said my name the way people say a word they're not sure they know how to pronounce anymore. "Gerald, I think we got off on the wrong foot here. I think there has been a misunderstanding, and if we just sit down and talk this through like family." I said, "The deputies are parked around the corner on Clement Street. I'm going to ask you to leave my home before I call them inside. What happens after that is between you and the prosecutor." He left. He did not run, but he walked to his car faster than I had ever seen him move toward anything. The deputies came in for coffee. I appreciated that. The hearing on Thursday lasted 40 minutes. The handwriting analysis was unambiguous. Patricia's motion to invalidate the power of attorney was granted before lunch. Dr. Armand's business records, once subpoenaed, revealed 4 prior cases in which he had provided fraudulent cognitive evaluations for cash payments from family members seeking guardianship over elderly relatives. He was arrested on Wednesday before the hearing even occurred. His attorney was already negotiating a plea arrangement by Friday. Raymond was charged with elder financial exploitation, conspiracy to commit fraud, and forgery of legal documents. Carol was charged as a co-conspirator. The evidence that she had been present for at least 2 of the conversations with Dr. Armand, documented through phone records and a single text message in which she asked Raymond whether the doctor had completed the evaluation yet, was sufficient for the prosecutor to include her in the filing. She called me from outside the courthouse after her arraignment. She was crying in a way that was entirely different from the way she cried at Donna's funeral. She said she was sorry. She said Raymond had pushed her into it. She said she had never actually wanted me to be put anywhere, that she loved me, that she was her mother's daughter, and she would never have gone through with it. I listened to her until she finished. Then I said, "Carol, I know your mother. She would not recognize the woman who slid that pen across the table." I ended the call. The restraining order was filed that same afternoon. 500 feet, no contact by phone, by mail, or through any intermediary. Patricia stapled it to the front of the guardianship petition Raymond had been so confident about and placed both documents in the permanent case file. 11 weeks later, I drove to a small town in western North Carolina that Donna had cut out of a magazine 20 years ago and stuck to our refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a sunflower. She had written in the margin, in her handwriting, in blue ballpoint pen, "Let's go here someday." We never went. There was always a job, a school year, a reason to stay home. I pulled into the town on a Tuesday afternoon in October when the mountains were every possible color of orange and red. I had a reservation at a small rental cabin on the edge of a lake. I had a bag in the back seat and no particular schedule. The following morning, I walked into a small general store on the main road through town and picked up a newspaper, a bottle of water, and a small coffee from the machine on the counter. The woman at the register told me the total, $4.11. I took out my card and tapped it against the reader. A soft sound. Approved. I stood there for a moment longer than necessary. I thought about a pharmacy in Columbus. I thought about a pharmacist named Brianna who had been kind to me when I did not deserve to be embarrassed. I thought about a woman who had cut a picture out of a magazine and written 3 words in blue ink next to a sunflower magnet. I took my coffee outside and sat on the wooden bench in front of the store. The mountains were close enough that I felt like I could reach out and rest my hand against them. The air smelled like pine and wood smoke and cold water. I had learned something through all of this that I wish I had understood earlier, and I want to share it with you because if you are watching this, there is a good chance it matters to someone you know, or someone you love, or perhaps to you yourself. Quiet patience is not the same thing as surrender. When an older person absorbs an insult in silence, when they don't yell and don't argue and don't make a scene, that silence is almost always being mistaken for fragility by the people who caused it. Arrogant people hear silence and think they have won. They have not won. What they have done is given a patient, experienced person time to remember exactly how the world actually works. And the world, in my experience, always works in the direction of consequences. Providing for the people you love is an act of strength. Allowing them to exploit that provision without limit is not love. It is a slow, quiet erasure of yourself. There comes a point where protecting your dignity is not a betrayal of your family. It is the only honest thing left to do. If this story meant something to you, I would be grateful if you shared it with someone who might need to hear it. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from. I read every one. And if you have ever been through something like this yourself, or if someone you care about has, please leave your story below. You are not alone in this.